¿Qué la que hay? Estamos activos. Bienvenido. We are now una comunidad of more than 12,900 suscriptores. So big shout out to all y'all that have already subscribed. And if you haven't yet, come on with it. In esta lección, I'm going to break down bien, bueno, buena, and buen so that you understand the difference between each of these and when to use each one. So first, I'm going to quickly give you la definición for each of these. Then with the rest of la lección, I'm going to give you specific ejemplos for how to use each one. So here we go. Bien means well. Bueno and buena both mean good. Bueno is for masculine nouns and buena is for feminine nouns. Buenos and buenas are just the plural version of these. And buen is the shortened version of bueno that you'll use when you put it in front of the thing you're describing rather than behind it. So this is important. Buen can only be used instead of bueno, not any of these other ones. So here are some ejemplos for when you'll use each of these. You'll use bien to say, I'm doing well. So when somebody asks you, ¿Cómo estás?, you can say, Estoy bien. I'm well. Something is done well or works well. Like, hablas español muy bien. You speak Spanish very well. Or, mi celular no funciona bien. My cell phone doesn't work well. Now, this is important. Many learners would incorrectly say, hablas español muy bueno. But you don't do actions good, you do them well. So you'll use bien anytime you want to say that something is done well. That's fine or okay. For these, you can just say está bien or just bien. Very. You may be saying, but muy is very. And it is. But bien can also be used to say very. In some countries, bien is actually more common than muy, but you can use them both interchangeably. Bien, muy, they both mean very. Tú vives bien lejos. You live very far. Hablas bien rápido. You speak very fast. For all these examples, you could also use muy instead of bien. You'll also use bien to say other popular phrases like bien hecho. ¿Todo bien? Me caes bien. Pórtate bien. You'll use the different versions of bueno to say things like that something is good. Whether you mean that something is good quality, good for you, that someone is good at something, they're a good person, lo que sea, you'll use some version of bueno. Tu español es muy bueno. Your Spanish is very good. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of learners confuse this with bien. So they'll say, tu español es muy bien. But this is like saying your Spanish is very well, which don't make no sense. So you'll use bien with verbs to say they are done well. So, tú hablas español muy bien. You'll use bueno to describe nouns as being good. Tu español es muy bueno. So bien for you speak Spanish well, bueno for your Spanish is good. That's the difference. Here are some other examples you can use with bueno to say that something is good. Esta tienda tiene precios buenos. This store has good prices. Este libro es muy bueno. This book is very good. Tu perro es muy bueno. Your dog is very well behaved. Jaime es un hombre bueno. Jaime is a good man. Comer dulces todos los días no es bueno. Eating sweets every day is not good for you. Mi vecina es buena con los niños. My neighbor is good with children. Eres bueno en eso. You're good at that. Estas limonadas están muy buenas. These lemonades are very good. Notice that I use estar to talk about something tasting good. This is important for the next one, which is that you can use bueno to say that someone is hot or sexy. Now, here's where you have to be careful. In English, we say, you look good today. But if you translate that into Spanish as estás buena hoy, what you're really saying is, you look sexy today, which I've done. Like we saw earlier, you'll use estar plus bueno to say that something tastes good. So if you tell somebody estás buena or estás bueno, what you're really saying is you look good, like good enough to eat. So cuidado. If you want to say you look nice today, say te ves bien hoy. This is kind of like saying you look fine today, but it's not quite that. It's like saying you look nice today. Of course, you can still use estás bueno or estás buena if you want to. I'm just here to make sure you do it intentionally. You can also use bueno to say well. So now you're going to be like, but you just said bien means well. This is a different kind of well. If I said, well, I guess I'm doing well, that second well is bien. That first one is bueno. Por ejemplo, I could say bueno or bueno. Ya te dije. This version of bueno is also synonymous with pues, which also means well. You can use them the same way. Similar to bien, you can also use bueno to say okay. And last for bueno, here are some popular frases that you can use. Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches. Notice that only buenos días is buenos. The other two are buenas. That's because only días is masculine. Tardes and noches are both feminine. Instead of these phrases, you can also just say buenas. Qué buenas noticias. Bueno, qué bueno. And last but not least, buen is the easiest one of all because it's so limited. You'll only use buen when you would use bueno, but you're putting it at the front of the noun that you're talking about. So instead of saying, él es un amigo bueno, you could say, él es un buen amigo. Now, like I said at the beginning of this lesson, you can only use buen to replace bueno, not any of the other ones. So you couldn't turn eres una buena amiga to eres una buen amiga because buen is only for masculine nouns and amiga is feminine. Another popular example that you'll both hear and use is que tenga un buen día. So those are all the differences between bien, bueno, buena, buenos, buenas, and buen. Practice these so you remember the differences, and I'll see you in the next lección. Gracias por estar aquí. Hasta la próxima.